In addition to my statement, I would like to say this has been a very difficult week.
The headlines keep showing up with that same grim tone. A canceled hit show, a public feud with a co-star who called her every name in the book, a finale, a divorce. Stack those words together and it's easy to see why people assume Sara Gilbert is having a rough time of it. But stack the actual facts together instead, and a very different picture appears. This is the story of a woman who has spent almost her entire life in front of cameras, who has been blamed publicly by one of the most famous people in America, who has closed out 2 long-running shows on her own terms, and who, at 50 years old, is arguably in a stronger position than she has ever been. So let's actually look at what happened piece by piece, and figure out whether things aren't looking good is really true, or whether it's just a headline built to make you click. Sara Gilbert was born in January 1975 in Santa Monica, California, into a family that was already deep in show business. Her half-sister, Melissa Gilbert, was already known around the world for playing Laura Ingalls on Little House on the Prairie. Her half-brother, Jonathan Gilbert, had also acted as a kid. So when people hear that Sara Gilbert became a working actress before she was even a teenager, the easy assumption is that she was simply carried along by her family's career. But that isn't really what happened. By her own account, she decided she wanted to act when she was around 6 years old after watching her siblings work, and she pushed for it. She wasn't placed into auditions by a stage parent. She wanted in, and she made that clear early. That detail matters more than it might seem, because it sets the tone for almost everything that came after. Sara Gilbert has spent her career making deliberate choices rather than simply accepting whatever came her way, and that pattern shows up again and again if you look closely enough. The role that made her a household name arrived when she was 13. In 1988, ABC premiered Roseanne, a sitcom about a working-class family in Illinois that didn't look or sound like most television at the time. Gilbert was cast as Darlene, the middle child, sharp-tongued, unimpressed by sentimentality, more comfortable with sarcasm than with hugs. In an era when TV kids were mostly written to be cute and agreeable, Darlene stood out because she wasn't trying to be liked. She was funny in a cutting way and honest in a way that felt closer to how real teenagers actually talk. Audiences responded, and so did critics. Gilbert picked up 2 Emmy nominations for the role while she was still a teenager herself, which is not a small thing. Roseanne spent years as one of the highest-rated shows in the country, and a big part of its emotional realism came from how believable the Connor kids felt, Darlene especially. What's easy to forget, though, is that Gilbert didn't let the fame swallow the rest of her life. While she was one of the most recognizable young actors in America, she also enrolled at Yale University and graduated in 1997. Plenty of child actors from that era struggled to hold onto a normal trajectory once fame hit. Gilbert built one anyway, on top of the fame rather than instead of it. There's a piece of Sara Gilbert's history that doesn't get nearly enough attention when people try to sum up her career. She came out publicly as gay in the 1990s, at a time when very few working actors in Hollywood were doing that. This wasn't a low-risk decision. Careers at that level had been damaged over far less. There was no clear playbook to follow and no guarantee that audiences or executives would still want to work with her afterward. She did it anyway, and rather than turning it into a big public statement, she simply lived her life honestly and let her work speak for itself. She later had 2 children, a son and a daughter, with her former partner, television writer Allison Adler, at a time when almost no actors with her level of visibility were building families so openly. Long before authenticity became a marketing buzzword, Gilbert was quietly practicing it in a business that didn't always reward that kind of honesty. If Roseanne is the reason most people know her name, it's far from the only thing she built. In 2010, at 35 years old, Gilbert created a daytime talk show. She didn't just show up to host it. She conceived the idea, developed it, served as an executive producer, and sat at the panel table herself. The concept reportedly grew out of her own experience as a new mother and a desire for a space where women could talk honestly about parenting, culture, and everyday life without the usual daytime gloss. The show premiered on CBS in October 2010 under the name The Talk, and it lasted 14 seasons, a daytime Emmy, more than a decade as a fixture of American daytime television, built from an idea she had and carried through to execution. That's worth sitting with for a second. Plenty of famous actors have their name attached to projects other people built. This one, Gilbert actually built. She stepped back from hosting in 2019 on her own terms to focus on her family, and the show continued on afterward for years. When CBS eventually announced the talk would end after its 14th season, wrapping in late 2024, it wasn't a scandal or a collapse. It was the natural conclusion of a long, successful run, one of the longer-running daytime panel shows of its era. Here's the part of Gilbert's story that tends to get flattened into a single headline, when in reality, it's one of the more remarkable comeback stories in modern television. During a sketch on The Talk, Gilbert and John Goodman briefly revived Darlene and Dan Connor for a bit of nostalgia. That small moment turned into serious conversations about reviving the entire series, and Gilbert became one of the people pushing hardest to make it happen, reconnecting cast members, shaping the pitch, and helping convince network executives it could work. It worked. Roseanne returned to ABC in March 2018, 21 years after the original series ended, and the premiere became the most-watched show on American television that season, reportedly pulling in around 20 million viewers and beating out shows that had been dominating the ratings for years. For a revival, that's an almost unheard-of result. Gilbert, serving as an executive producer, had bet that audiences still wanted this family, and she turned out to be exactly right. 2 months after the revival premiered, Roseanne Barr posted a racist tweet about Valerie Jarrett, a former senior advisor to President Obama, comparing her to an ape. Barr deleted the post, but screenshots had already spread everywhere, and the backlash was immediate. Gilbert, as both a co-star and an executive producer of the show, responded quickly, publicly condemning the comment and stating that it did not reflect the values of the cast and crew. Reports at the time noted her statement came out shortly before ABC announced the show's cancellation. The network pulled the #1 comedy in America that same day. What followed was a bitter, very public fallout between Barr and Gilbert. Barr has spoken about it in extremely harsh terms over the years, accusing Gilbert of betraying her and describing the situation using language far angrier than anything typically exchanged between former co-stars. It became one of the most talked-about celebrity feuds of that period, and it's understandable why headline writers still reach for it whenever Gilbert's name comes up. But the sequence of events matters here, and it's not really in dispute. Barr posted the tweet. Barr deleted it and initially took responsibility. Gilbert didn't write anything racist. She publicly condemned something that already happened as the person overseeing a show built around a message of inclusion. Whether you think that response was the right call or too fast is a fair question people still argue about. What isn't really up for debate is who caused the original crisis in the first place, and it wasn't Sara Gilbert. This is where the Gilbert's career is falling apart, narrative runs into a serious problem. What actually happened next? Rather than watching the franchise die with the cancellation, Gilbert helped build The Connors, a spin-off carrying forward the same cast, minus Roseanne Barr, who by mutual agreement had no creative or financial stake in the new show. The writers didn't quietly write the Roseanne character out. They had her die of an opioid overdose, tying the family's grief directly to a crisis that had touched countless working-class families like The Connors, the same audience the original show had always spoken to. It was a bold, difficult choice for a network sitcom to make, and it paid off. The Connors premiered in October 2018 and ran for 7 seasons, protecting jobs for the cast and crew and keeping that world alive on screen all the way through 2025. Gilbert stayed at the center of it the entire time, playing Darlene through every season while continuing as an executive producer. She first played that character at 13. She was still playing her at 50, while also helping run the show behind the scenes, a run that spans nearly 4 decades if you count back to the original Roseanne. That is not a small achievement. Very few actors get to grow up inside one character across that much of their life, and even fewer get a hand in shaping the show around them the whole way through. The Connors wrapped with a shortened 7th season, framed from the start as a farewell, and the 2-part series finale aired in April 2025. This wasn't a show getting quietly canceled for poor ratings. It was a planned goodbye for a TV family that had been part of American living rooms for the better part of 4 decades. Gilbert talked about the ending warmly rather than with any sense of loss or crisis, telling people that the show and its cast and crew felt like family, and that the bond built over so many years was something that felt deep in our soul. That's not the language of someone whose life is falling apart. It's the language of someone closing a long, meaningful chapter with gratitude rather than regret. The other piece people point to when they talk about Gilbert's life falling apart is her split from musician Linda Perry, the former Four Non-Blondes frontwoman, and a songwriter behind hits for artists like Pink, Christina Aguilera, and Gwen Stefani. Gilbert and Perry began dating around 2011, married in March 2014, and had a son together in 2015. Gilbert filed for legal separation in December 2019. They were declared legally separated in 2021, and the divorce was finalized in December 2024. Divorce is never something to wave away as no big deal, and a process that stretched across 5 years clearly wasn't simple. But the terms tell their own story. Joint legal and physical custody, roughly equal time with their son, no child support owed either way, and both parties waiving spousal support. Those aren't the terms of two people trying to punish each other. They're the terms of two people who managed to separate without turning it into a public war. Perry herself has spoken about the split without bitterness, describing it as part of an ongoing life journey rather than some kind of failure. Gilbert, true to form, kept the details largely private and let the calm outcome speak for itself. Put the timeline together, and the picture looks nothing like collapse. A woman who chose acting for herself as a small child became one of the standout young performers of a landmark sitcom. She built a 14-season talk show from an idea in her own head. She helped orchestrate one of the most successful sitcom revivals in television history, and when that revival blew up in the most public way imaginable, she was part of the team that rebuilt it into a show that ran for 7 more years. She came out and built a family openly at a time when doing so carried real professional risk. She ended 2 major shows on her own terms, with warmth rather than panic. And she navigated the end of a marriage in a way that avoided a public spectacle almost entirely. None of that erases the hard parts. The Roseanne fallout was genuinely brutal, and no divorce is painless no matter how amicably it's handled. But things aren't looking good for Sara Gilbert, just doesn't hold up against what she's actually spent the last several years doing. If anything, her career reads like a study in how to handle a public disaster without letting it define you. Absorb the hit, rebuild something that lasts, and keep working. That's a much better story than the headlines are giving her credit for.